just having to sit down and look at one of the folders was an incredible process. Carrying those things around, just the logistics and all that, and e-portfolios have a very different sort of storage thing. You access those bits that you want, when you want them, and so forth. Processing, you can do automation to some extent. So, for example, just submitting work, you can have an automated feedback message going out saying, thank you, I've received this, and it's going to be attended to, and you'll hear from us. So that's some feedback, that says, okay, great, I've done this. Scalability. So I mentioned this sort of thing about statement banks, and I was a bit critical about it, but it needn't be such a bad thing. When I work over and over again with students who do similar sorts of things, it might be quite useful actually to have a range of things that always come up, which I can then draw on and feed back. So it helps me and it helps the student by increasing the speed at which I'm able to respond, because I can draw on things I've already got, and I can therefore scale what I'm doing up, and I can give feedback more quickly to more people because I've got these sorts of things. And adaptivity. So one thing I do with one set of students might be tweaked a bit and done with another quite easy. That's what the E can do. Communication, well, rapid communication, we've talked about that. Range of audiences. Captured and given a degree of semi-permanence. So one of the things I might do sometimes is invite my students to have Skype conversations, tutorials with me, rather than me writing loads of stuff down. And they can then record those conversations, and then they can go back to those conversations. And it makes things easier for me because I can just say it in 20 minutes, what would take me 1.5 hours to write, and I can have a record, they can have a record, and so in that sort of sense that might be quite, and it could be just simple audio recording. I've got a number of students, they come to tutorials with me with their little device and say, can I record this? And then they are able to go over it again and analyze it and all of that. So it can improve communication.
What does semi-permanence mean here? Isn't it permanent?
There is always the danger that you delete it, or that it gets corrupt, that it gets lost, that you can't find it anymore, that sort of thing. Yes, but yes, yes. Then the sharing of intellectual objects, and I think that's quite important as well. So you can capture things. And a lot of my students in class would come and bring their mobile phones out and start to photograph what's going on the board, making it permanent, and then filing it in some way amongst their material so they can use it and draw on it again. So that's the sort of thing that's meant. And then they can use it as evidence. They go somewhere, take a picture, annotate the picture, it goes in the e-portfolio, and they use it like that. Construction and representation. The ability to represent ideas in a variety of ways and to move and translate between these representations. I think that's quite important as well in terms of technology. So yes, you can write something down using a word processor, and it's very linear, starts somewhere, goes through and ends somewhere else. But you can use different types of tools. You can use mind mapping tools that give you a very different way of representing ideas. You can use web pages where you integrate multimodal elements, text, spoken word, video, image. You can make these things interact and showing conceptual understanding. That's much better than actually having to write about it. Or you can augment things with links, with hyperlinks, and so forth. That's called glossing, which is a very old technique, started in the West, somewhere in the sort of 7th century, when the monks in the monasteries translated or copied Bibles in Latin, and on the side they started to make annotations in their own vernacular, yeah? And that's how it's developed. So it's a very old cultural technique. And these annotations can actually tell you a lot, can give you a lot of feedback about where the learner is and what they understand. Yeah, and then representation, mutability, forget about that. Yeah? So, ePortfolios. Assessment tools to document the attainment of standards. So that's one way of looking at portfolios, and that'd be quite interesting to hear from you how you use them. Yeah? So a positivist model at the assessment portfolio. I do something, I collect the stuff, I give it to the teacher, and he or she makes a judgment about whether or not standards, learning outcomes are evidenced in the portfolio that was submitted. Then you've got this other thing of as digital stories of deep learning. So what you actually do is, you don't keep this portfolio for your teacher, you keep it for yourself. Yeah? And what you do is, you use it as a way of documenting your learning journey, and it's a private document. Yeah? And the beauty about ePortfolios is, from time to time you can say, and this bit now I'm happy for the teacher to see it, so you can click on the system and say, share that with, and then somebody else can see it. But as you go through the process of constructing it, it's yours, only you can see it, or only the people you want to share it with can see it. And then digital resumes to highlight competence. We know that from artists, or modeling is such a big thing in the West. So if you want to become a model, you have to have a portfolio of pictures of you in doing certain things. I'm no expert in this sort of thing, but or if you're an architect or an artist, you want to show what sort of things you can do, so you put together a portfolio. And what you do there is, if I go for a job interview, I might select a particular aspect of the work and present that. If I talk to a friend and want to tell them about the sorts of things I'm doing, I might select a different sort of thing. That sort of flexibility to highlight competence. And we've moved very much into this process back in my university of doing this thing, highlighting. And why? We say, don't you dare hand in a portfolio that's thicker than that, or that's got more element than that, because the inclination is, let's throw everything in, give it to the teacher, and somehow they're gonna make some sense of that. What does it do? It forces you to select. And what do you have to do in order to select? You have to reflect. You have to choose. You have to say, what were the learning outcomes that were meant to be, demonstrated here? And what's the best piece of work that actually shows that I can do that? So it performs a very useful function in actually, so less is more, yeah? That'd be my motto about this, yeah? When people say, oh, how many things? I said, and if it's one, that's okay, so long as it presents evidence. And often it's at least 3 or 5 things of very different nature. So that's quite good about this. But let's just be aware, and that's what this slide is trying to say. When we talk about portfolios, there is portfolios and there is portfolios, and we need to be quite clear at the now. I'm actually go to my first job interview and say, and look, here's a portfolio of the sorts of things I've done as a student teacher. These are the sorts of lessons I taught the student, the sort of work. So 3 different audiences in that sense. Yeah, what types are there? This thing about portfolio as a process or a product. As a product, it's a purposeful aggregation by the learner of digital artifacts. As a process, it's characterized by an engagement in planning, synthesizing, sharing, discussing, reflecting, giving, receiving, and responding to feedback. So you can see how here we get into this whole much richer process, and whilst of course it's okay to have it as a product as well, I'd certainly encourage you to think about portfolios as a process as well. And then how do they differ? Well, they got different structures. They can focus on description, or they can focus on analysis, reflection, and interpretation. And very often, my students, when they first use portfolios, they do this, description. And only over time are they able to sort of move into these sorts of areas, and it's important to foster those. And this question about, selection that I've already talked about. So what are the benefits? Why do we have them? Yield evidence of learning, help to focus student thinking and facilitate reflection, document the learner's progress over time. And that's, I think, also something very nice in terms of that sort of learning journey that I alluded to. Know where you are now, know where you need to be, and how to get there. So portfolio is a very useful tool to actually allow you to do that. Enhance students' communication and organizational skills, provide a way of identifying and recognizing prior learning. I don't know whether that's very common in Pakistan, but certainly in the UK it's not uncommon for people, particularly professional people, wanting to do a degree to develop themselves where they've got lots of experience. They can bring a portfolio in, and then we can make a judgment. You've actually done so many professional development activities that match with what you'd be learning on the course, that we'd be quite happy to give you a certain number of credits as a token of appreciation of the work that you've already done. So it's recognizing and valorizing what's already done. Okay, a colleague and friend of mine, Graham Atwell, thinks that portfolios have got these 7 functions. They help you recognize learning, record learning, reflect on learning, validate learning, present learning, plan learning, and assess learning. So very often, and the title or the inherent title of this session would suggest that this is the main function of portfolios. It is one function, but should it be the main function? Not necessarily. And certainly it doesn't need to be the main function. There's all these very valuable functions around it supporting learning as well. How do you develop e-portfolio based learning? Define what you mean by the thing. Make sure your students understand and you understand, and if you've got the same idea. Understand what the benefits are of portfolio-based learning. Make sure you're prepared properly, particularly if it's e-portfolios. What